The south wind carried no relief. It was the end of a long summer in the 1870s, and the Texas panhandle was baked hard. The wind tasted of red dust, grit that settled in the folds of your clothes and the lines around your eyes. It was a wind that promised nothing but more heat, more dryness. This was the land of dusty crossroads, a town that existed only because the new railroad tracks had decided to cross there, laying steel bones over the old Comanche hunting grounds. From a low rise, Tahan watched the train. It was a smoking beast, ugly and loud, fouling the endless sky. He sat his gray horse, Ghost Wind, with a stillness that was part of the land itself. The horse was aptly named, moving with a silence that belied its power. Tahan was 22 years old, built with the lean muscle of a man who worked hard and ate little. His black hair was braided, his face holding the calm, watchful expression of his people. He was Comanche, and this land had been his people's map for generations. Now, it was being sliced apart by steel and wire. Tied to his saddle was the shield his grandfather had made. It was old buffalo hide, stretched tight, painted with the image of a red-tailed hawk descending. It was a piece of his soul. His goal was simple, yet it felt harder every day to earn an honest wage. He could guide, he could hunt what was left, he could break horses better than any man in the county. White or red, he needed the money, the hard coin, to protect his mother. Atsa, she was old now, living in their lodge near the reservation line, and she deserved peace. He just wanted to keep his dignity in a world that was trying to strip it from him with every new spike driven into the ground. The train hissed to a stop at the station, a crude plank building. Men began to unload the freight. Tahan's eyes narrowed. Not cattle, not grain, spools, massive spools of the new invention barbed wire, the devil's rope. He watched the thick-gloved hands of the railroad men roll the spools onto the platform, a new kind of weapon being stockpiled. It was a promise of sharp lines, of kept out and kept in. It was the end of the open range, the end of the bison, the end of everything he knew. Miles away, on the porch of a small, struggling ranch, Evelyn May Carter watched that same wind. It fluttered a piece of delicate white fabric hanging from a nail on the doorframe, her wedding veil. It had arrived on the stagecoach 2 days ago, a gift from her intended, a reminder. She was 19 years old, with hair the color of dried corn silk and eyes that held a tiredness that did not belong to youth. A small body pressed against her leg, Avie. She looked down and softened, her hand coming to rest on the boy's dark hair. Jonah. He was 4 years old, a serious child with big, dark eyes. He was her little son, as the few people in Dusty Crossroads understood it. He was the reason she was sitting on this porch, about to tie herself to a man older than her father. The truth was a heavier stone, one she carried alone. Jonah was her nephew, her dead sister's child, orphaned by the smallpox that had swept through 2 winters ago. He was a secret she had to protect. Her gaze drifted west, past their own meager fences, to the land that rolled away, undefined, towards the Comanche territory. Her future husband, Silas Pike, owned most of what she could see, and what he did not own, he intended to. Silas was 45 years old, a cattle baron who sat on the county council. He was rich, he was powerful, and he was a dangerous man to cross. He had bought her father's debt, and now he was buying her. The wedding was the price for her family's survival. The Carter Ranch was the last piece of land buffering the new settlers from the Comanche lands. It was a line that was becoming harder to hold. Lieutenant Webb, the new cavalry officer, patrolled it with a grim efficiency. His blue-uniformed men a constant reminder that the old ways were over. The government wanted the Comanche on the reservation. Full stop. But a few bands, like Tahan's family, still clung to the edges, hunting and trading as they always had, trying to live between the worlds. Silas Pike wanted this last piece of land. He wanted the water rights that came with it. And he wanted Evelyn. Her father, broken by debt and drought, had agreed to all of it. The wedding was in 10 days. Sheriff Dugan, a man who wore his badge like a purchased trinket, was deeply in Silas Pike's pocket. There was no law in Dusty Crossroads that Silas did not approve of first. Evelyn sighed, the red dust settling on the porch rail. She looked back at the veil. It was beautiful, made of lace she could never have afforded. It felt like a shroud. She and Tahan were neighbors, of a sort, the uneasy kind. Her father traded with Tahan's mother, salt for herbs, a side of deer for flour. Tahan himself sometimes appeared at their fence line, silent as the horse he rode. He would bring news of a coming sandstorm, or warn of a prairie fire miles away. He had a stillness that she envied. Last month, when Jonah had been sick with a fever, Tahan had appeared with a small skin of mare's milk, thick and strange. He had given it to her father, for the boy. He had said, his voice low, "Atsa's medicine." Evelyn had watched from the window. She had watched Tahan ride away, his back straight, the hawk shield a defiant circle of color against the brown landscape. He asked for nothing. He just was. He was a man earning his way, holding his head high while men like Silas Pike bought and sold the world around him. In the secret corners of her heart, Evelyn May Carter held a deep, quiet respect for the Comanche man. She picked up Jonah. He was getting heavy. "Let's go inside." "Little man," she whispered, her voice rough from the dust. "It is almost time for supper." She carried him past the wedding veil. The wind caught it again, making it dance in the air, a pale ghost reaching for the red earth. Tahan turned ghost wind away from the rise. The train whistle shrieked, a sound that set his teeth on edge. He saw the spools of wire, gleaming sharp and new on the platform. He saw the cavalry patrol moving like blue ants in the distance, and he saw the small, weathered house of the Carter family, sitting right on the line. He saw the borders, the new lines being drawn with steel and law, and he felt the old, invisible lines, the ones of honor, of respect, of the land itself being pulled tighter, until he was not sure there would be any room left for a man like him to breathe. He nudged ghost wind into a lope, the horse's hooves making no sound on the hard-baked ground. He had to get back to his mother. The air smelled of iron and dust, and something else. It smelled like trouble. Silas Pike did not knock. He walked onto the Carter porch as if he were measuring it for lumber. He was a broad man, solid, with a face that looked like it had been carved from sun-baked wood and left in the smokehouse. He held his hat in his hand, a gesture that was meant to look polite, but only looked impatient. Evelyn's father, a thin reed of a man named Thomas, met him at the door, already wringing his hands. "Silas, we were not expecting you," Thomas Carter said, his voice weak. "Was in the area," Silas stated. His eyes, the color of muddy water, scanned past Thomas and found Evelyn, who stood by the cold hearth, Jonah holding onto her skirt. Silas Pike's gaze lingered on her, a look of frank assessment, like she was a heifer he was considering for purchase. "I've spoken to the bank in Amarillo," Silas said, not bothering to address Thomas, his eyes still on Evelyn. "Your notes are due, all of them." Thomas Carter seemed to shrink. "Silas, I just need a little more time. The drought." "Time is what you have run out of." "Thomas," Silas cut him off. He stepped fully inside, forcing Thomas to back away. The room suddenly felt small, sucked empty of air. "However, I am a reasonable man. I am prepared to make those notes disappear. Every last cent of your debt." Evelyn felt Jonah's small fingers tighten on her dress. She knew what was coming. It had been circling them for months, like a vulture. "In exchange," Silas continued, his voice a low rumble, "for a union between our families, I want your daughter's hand. The wedding will be in 10 days. Her father looked at the floor. He was a good man, but he was a broken one. He was about to agree. Evelyn stepped forward, pulling Jonah with her. "And the water rights," Evelyn said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the heavy air. "This is not about a union. This is about you wanting our spring." Silas Pike finally turned his full attention to her. He almost smiled. "The girl has a head for business?" "That is good. Yes, the land is part of it. A marriage joins what is hers to what is mine. It is a clean way to settle things. It guarantees my cattle a clear path to the water." "Evelyn, hush," her father whispered, horrified. "No," she said, her chin high. She looked directly at Silas Pike. "My father is desperate. I will not let you cheat him on top of buying me. I will agree. For my family." Thomas Carter let out a small, wounded sound. "But I have a condition," Evelyn said. Silas Pike's eyebrows, thick and gray, drew together. He was not a man who liked conditions. "We will marry in 10 days. But the notes, the debts, I want to see the papers from the bank, stamped paid in full. I want them in my hand. Until I have those papers, I am your wife in name only. The law will see it that way, but God will not. There will be no bedding, not until my family's name is clear." There was a thick, dangerous silence. Silas stared at her. He was a man of large appetites, and he did not like to be told to wait for his supper. He saw the iron in her spine, the sheer, unblinking defiance in her eyes. He saw a 19-year-old girl making a bargain for her own body. He found it amusing, and, to his surprise, he found he wanted her more for it. He wanted to be the one to finally break that spirit. He gave a short, hard nod. "You are a practical woman. Evelyn May. I respect that. 10 days. You have my word. The papers will be there. And then, you will be my wife, in every sense of the word." He turned and left. He did not say goodbye. The slamming of the screen door was the sound of a hammer falling, of a contract sealed. Evelyn sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. Jonah crawled into her lap, and she held him, burying her face in his hair, breathing in the simple scent of him. She had bought her family's life. She just did not know what it had cost her own. 2 days later, Tahan stood at the railroad depot. The station agent, a nervous man with a green eye shade, was counting out coins. "It is a straightforward job, Tahan," the agent said, not looking him in the eye. "The company needs 20 good horses moved to the next survey camp. They need a man who knows the land, who can get them there fast. They pay well." Tahan nodded, his gaze fixed on the map unrolled on the desk. The route was marked in red pencil. It was the fastest route. It cut directly across the open land that lay between the Carter Ranch and his mother's lodge. It cut right across the shared spring, the spring that Silas Pike now considered his own property. This was not a mistake. The railroad men did not care about local disputes. They cared about speed. Tahan needed this money. The drought had been hard on his people. 2. The hunting was scarce. This pay would buy flour and sugar for Atsa, and for 2 other families. It was honest work. "I will do it," Tahan said. His voice was low. He scooped the coins into his pouch. He would take the horses. He would cross the land as he always had. It was his right. It was the land's right. He would not be scared off by Silas Pike's greed. He did not know that, by signing the contract, he had just painted a target on his back. Silas Pike sat in the dim, smoky back room of the saloon, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of him. Across from him sat Mac Rook, a man who looked like he had been assembled from leftover parts. Rook had a long, scarred face and eyes that never seemed to blink. He was Silas's blunt instrument. "He is taking the railroad job," Silas said. "He is going to lead those horses right past the Carter Spring, my spring. He is doing it to mock me, to mock my new wife. He is just an Indian." "Boss," Rook said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "You want me to scare him?" "Scaring him does not work," Silas said, his fingers drumming on the table. "I want him gone. Lieutenant Webb is already sniffing around. I want Tahan out of the territory. I want him arrested." "Arrested for what?" Silas smiled, a cold, thin expression. "You are a cattleman. Mac, you know how easy it is for a man to lose a cow. Or two, especially when they wander close to the reservation line. A man might find those cows, or maybe just their hides, near the Comanche camp. A man like Tahan, known for being resourceful. Sheriff Dugan would have to investigate." Mac Rook's face split into a gap-toothed grin. He understood. He is supposed to leave with that string of horses tomorrow night. "Then you had better get busy," Silas said. "Find a stray. Something with my brand. Make it look right. I want that Comanche in a cell by morning." That afternoon, the sky changed. The wind, which had been a steady, hot breath from the south, stopped entirely. The air became thick, heavy, and yellow. A wall of red dust was visible on the horizon, miles high. The new radio at the train station, a chattering box of sparks and noise, had warned of a severe sandstorm, to be followed by unseasonal, heavy rain. Tahan had been moving his own small herd of horses to a sheltered box canyon. He passed near the Carter fence line. He saw Evelyn outside, fighting to latch a rattling barn door, her skirts whipping around her legs. Jonah was on the porch, crying from the frightening yellow light and the sudden, oppressive silence. Tahan rode Ghostwind over. He did not dismount. "The boy is sick," Evelyn shouted over the first low moan of the returning wind. Jonah had a fever, the same kind that had gripped him before. "It is the dust. It gets in his lungs." Tahan looked at the sky. They had maybe half an hour. He turned his horse and was gone, a gray shape disappearing into the yellow gloom. Evelyn cursed her helplessness, her heart pounding with a different kind of fear. She got the barn door latched and ran to the porch, sweeping Jonah up into her arms and barring the main door of the house just as the first wave of grit hit it like a shotgun blast. An hour later, as the world outside screamed and the house groaned under the weight of the wind, there was a pounding. It was not the storm. Evelyn cracked the door. Tahan stood there. He was covered in red dust, a living statue of red earth. He looked past her, into the room. He held out the same small skin he had brought before, full of mare's milk and a handful of dried herbs. "Atsa's medicine," he said. His voice was rough, for the boy's fever. "Boil the herbs in the milk." She stared at him. He had ridden through the heart of that storm to bring this. He had risked his horse, his life, for her, for Jonah. "You cannot ride back in this," she said, her voice shaking. "You will be killed. The barn. You must wait in the barn." He just looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Please," she said, "I cannot let you. Please, for me." He gave a single, curt nod. He moved past her, silent as smoke, and went to the barn. Evelyn closed the door, her hand trembling. She went to the stove to boil the milk, her heart a confusing, painful knot in her chest. She had a small, linen handkerchief, one her mother had embroidered with tiny blue flowers. It was the last nice thing she owned, besides the veil. After the milk was ready, she wrapped the handkerchief around a piece of bread and cheese. She battled her way through the howling darkness to the barn. He was in the lee of the main wall, sitting against a hay bale. Ghostwind stood nearby, calm as a stone. The roar of the wind in the barn was deafening, the whole structure shaking. Tahan was so still. He seemed to be part of the storm's quiet center. Evelyn handed him the small bundle. He looked at it, then at her. She had to lean in close to be heard. "Thank you," she yelled, her throat raw. "For Jonah." He nodded, accepting the food. He unwrapped it, and his fingers brushed the delicate embroidery. He paused. He looked at the tiny, careful stitches. She saw him look. She felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the weather. They were only 3 feet apart. The air crackled. It was not just the storm. It was the small, enclosed space, the smell of hay and horse and the man beside her. He smelled of dust and leather and something wild. She could see the pulse beating in his throat. She wanted to say something else. She wanted to tell him about Silas, about the wedding, about the fear that was choking her. But she could not. He was Comanche. She was a white woman, promised to another. To speak would be to cross a line that was more dangerous than any barbed wire. He carefully folded the handkerchief and tucked it into his shirt. His eyes met hers in the lantern light. It was just a look. It lasted only a second. But it was a promise of a different kind. It said he saw her. He truly saw her. She fled back to the house, her heart pounding harder than the storm. The wind died at dawn, and the rain began. A cold, driving, unseasonal rain that turned the red dust to red mud. By noon, Lieutenant Webb rode into dusty crossroads. He was a man who believed in paper. He believed in orders. He dismounted and nailed a freshly printed notice to the post office wall. The paper, signed by the territorial governor, declared it illegal for any citizen to house, trade with, or offer comfort to any native person not registered and confined to the reservation lands. The fine was $500. A wave of suspicion, colder than the rain, washed over the town. People looked at each other, and then they looked toward the Carter Ranch, the one that sat right on the line. The air was thick with it, and in the town jail, Sheriff Dugan was looking at a newly cut set of cattle hides, a satisfied smirk on his face. The rain that followed the sandstorm was not a blessing. It was a cold, violent assault, turning the world to a sea of red, grasping mud. The creek, usually a mild-mannered ribbon of water, had swollen into a roaring, brown monster. Evelyn May Carter held the wagon reins with white-knuckled hands. Beside her, Jonah was bundled in every blanket she owned, and at her feet sat a heavy wooden box. Father Holt had sent an urgent message. The storm had weakened the church foundation, and the box of antique silver, a wedding donation from Silas Pike's stores, meant to be recorded and blessed, was at risk from the flooding cellar. He had asked her to retrieve it and bring it to the parsonage for safekeeping. It was a strange request, made at the height of the storm's aftermath, but she was to be the wife of the town's most important man. This was her new duty. She had not counted on the bridge. When she reached the crossing, there was nothing but churning, debris-filled water. The bridge was gone, washed away as if it had never been. A cold, sharp fear, worse than the rain, sliced through her. She was trapped on the wrong side of the flood, with the night coming on, a sick child, and a box of Silas Pike's silver. Turning the wagon in the sucking mud was impossible. They would freeze or drown. She remembered the line shack, an old patrol cabin built for cattlemen years ago, on the far edge of their property. It was a hovel, barely 4 walls, but it was a roof. She guided the exhausted horses off the ruined path, pulling them toward the low rise where she prayed it still stood. It was nearly dark when she saw it, a low, dark shape against the weeping sky. But there was another shape, one that made her heart stop a horse, standing with its head down, ground hitched near the door. A gray horse, ghost wind. She stopped the wagon, her breath catching. Tahan was here, after the new law Lieutenant Webb had posted, after the whispers in town. Being found with him was dangerous, but the wind was cutting through her wet clothes, and Jonah was coughing. A small, weak sound. She had no choice. She lifted Jonah, his small body hot with fever, and slid from the wagon. She carried him to the door, which was slightly ajar. "Tahan," she called, her voice thin and small. He was inside. The shack was tiny, a single room no bigger than a good-sized pantry. He was in the far corner, on his knees, wringing water from a blanket. He was soaked to the bone, his black hair plastered to his skull, his skin slick in the gloom. Another man would have looked beaten. He looked like a piece of the landscape, like a wet stone. "The bridge is gone," she said, stating the obvious. "The boy, he is sick. We need shelter." He looked at her, then at the child. His dark eyes took in her drenched clothes, her shaking hands. He did not speak, just rose to his feet. He was shivering, a deep, racking tremor. He crossed the small space and looked past her at the wagon, then back at the creek she had just crossed, which was now a small river. He gestured at Jonah. "He carried him inside," she asked, but Tahan was already moving past her, out into the rain. He reappeared at the wagon, lifted the heavy silver box as if it were kindling, and set it inside the door. He returned to her, without a word. He took Jonah from her arms. The boy, half asleep and feverish, did not protest. He just coughed and burrowed his head against Tahan's wet shoulder. Tahan carried him inside and gently placed him on the only piece of furniture, a crude wooden pallet covered in straw and one thin, dry blanket. "Thank you," she whispered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. Tahan grunted in acknowledgement. He was shaking badly now. He went to his saddlebag, which hung from a peg, and pulled out a small, dark leather pouch. He unstoppered it and drank. The smell hit her even from across the room, bitter, sharp, like herbs and strong liquor. "My mother's," he said, his voice a low rasp. "For the cold." He drank again, a deep swallow. He swayed. He had been out in this storm for hours. She remembered the railroad job, the horses. "Your horses?" she asked. "Some lost in a gully. The mud." He put the pouch away. His movements were becoming slow, uncoordinated. The medicine, or the cold, was claiming him. He looked at the pallet where Jonah slept. He looked at her, standing there dripping and shaking. He looked at the tiny, cold, dark space. He stumbled. He caught himself on the wall, then slid down onto the straw pallet. He was not on it, but next to it, on the cold dirt floor. He pulled the single, rough blanket off the boy, who whimpered. Tahan, with a last visible effort, draped the blanket. It was a big, heavy army blanket. It covered the sleeping child, and it covered him, where he had collapsed beside the bed. Within a minute, a deep, ragged breathing told her he was asleep, or unconscious. Evelyn stood in the dark for a long time. The storm raged. Jonah coughed in his sleep. She was cold, so cold she thought her bones might crack. Slowly, she crept to the pallet. There was nowhere else to go. She lay down on the straw, on the other side of her nephew, pulling the edge of the heavy blanket over her own shoulders. She was not touching Tahan. There was the small, warm body of a 4-year-old child between them, but in the dark, cold shack. They were all three under the same cover. She fell into an exhausted, shivering sleep, the smell of rain, wet wool, and bitter herbs filling her senses. Light woke her, gray, cold, merciless light, pouring through the cracks in the wall. She was stiff, and she was warm. She opened her eyes and saw the rough weave of the blanket. Inches from her face, she was on the pallet, sometime in the night, seeking warmth. She had moved onto the straw bed. Tahan was still beside her, in the deep, unmoving sleep of the sick. He was on his back, breathing heavily, his face flushed with fever, and Jonah, the child, had migrated in his sleep. He was nestled in the space between them, his head resting on Tahan's shoulder, his small hand thrown across the man's chest. All three of them, together. A young Comanche made a mistake and woke up next to his neighbor's virgin bride and a little son. Evelyn's heart stopped. She tried to move, to untangle herself without waking anyone. But Jonah woke first. He sat up, his eyes bright with the fever's retreat. He looked at the man sleeping beside him. He saw the dark hair, the strong line of his jaw in the morning light. A look of pure, simple recognition crossed the boy's face. He smiled. He scrambled over, wrapped his small arms around Tahan's neck, and laid his cheek against the man's. "Pa," he whispered, his voice clear and sweet in the quiet shack. "Pa." Evelyn froze. Jonah, no, she breathed. Hush, baby. It was too late. Hoofbeats, many of them, splashing through the mud, stopping right outside. The door was kicked open. It slammed against the wall, shaking the whole shack. Silas Pike stood in the doorway, his broad body blocking the light. Behind him were Mac Rook and Sheriff Dugan, their faces grim. Silas's eyes, the color of muddy water, took in the scene. They saw the single pallet, the single blanket, the virgin bride, her hair undone and tangled from sleep, the Comanche, bare-chested under the blanket, and the child, clinging to the man's neck. For a second, there was no sound but the dripping rain. Silas Pike's face went from white to a deep, blotchy purple. The sound he made was not a word, but a roar, a sound of pure animal rage. "You!" he bellowed, his voice cracking. He was pointing a trembling finger at Tahan. "You filthy, red-skinned animal." Tahan was struggling to sit up. His eyes were clouded with sickness and the dregs of the medicine. "What?" he started, his voice a hoarse croak. "Get your hands off my bride!" Silas screamed. He lunged into the room. Evelyn was on her feet in an instant, grabbing Jonah, standing between Silas and the pallet. "No, Silas, stop! It is not what you think." "Not what I think." His voice was dangerously soft now, his eyes moving over her, from her tangled hair to her bare feet. "I find you in a line shack, in his bed, under his blanket, after a whole night." "I am untouched," Evelyn cried. She could hear the hysteria in her own voice. "I swear to you, Silas, on my mother's grave, I am untouched. The bridge was out. He was sick. We were all just trying to stay warm. He did nothing." Silas Pike laughed. It was a horrible, ugly sound. "A virgin's plea, a likely story. He has bewitched you, girl Dugan. Arrest this man for rape for kidnapping." "Now, Silas," Dugan said, stepping in, his eyes on the silver box near the door. But Silas was the law. "He was sick," Tahan said. He was on his feet now, but he was unsteady, swaying. He held the blanket around his waist. "The storm, the boy." "Silence, you liar," Sheriff Dugan said. He had his rope out. He saw which way the wind was blowing. "Ma'am, the evidence is plain. A man's reputation. A lady's." He did not finish. He shoved past Evelyn. "You cannot do this!" she screamed. Dugan and Mac Rook grabbed Tahan. He was too weak to fight them. He just stood there, his body burning with fever, his hands being bound in front of him. He looked at Evelyn. His eyes were clear, and in them she saw a cold, bottomless contempt. It was not for her. It was for all of them. They dragged him out into the mud. Silas grabbed Evelyn by the arm, his fingers biting into her flesh like a trap. "You will be quiet," he hissed, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled of whiskey. "You will go home. You will tell everyone he took you, and I rescued you. Your father's debt is not yet paid. Your honor, what is left of it, depends on you being silent. Do you understand me?" He threw her arm away from him. He mounted his horse, a big black stallion. They tied Tahan, still half naked, to his own saddle. Evelyn watched them ride away. Tahan's head bowed against the fever, his hands tied. By the time the party reached dusty crossroads, the story had grown fangs. The Comanche had taken the Carter girl. He had stolen her from her home. He had defiled her. At the Carter ranch, the wind picked up one last time. It tore the white wedding veil from the porch hook. The delicate lace tumbled across the red mud. A frantic, pale ghost. It snagged, finally, on a coil of new barbed wire left near the fence line. It hung there, ripped, dirty, and trapped. Evelyn, her face streaked with mud and tears, stood in the empty shack. She had to save him. She had to clear his name, but a more urgent, terrifying question now burned in her heart. She looked at her nephew, who was watching her with wide, silent eyes. Why had Jonah called that man Pa? The cell was a small stone box that smelled of old sweat, rust, and despair. Tahan lay on a cot that was nothing more than wooden slats and a thin, filthy blanket. The fever had not broken. It had settled deep into his bones, a cold fire that made him shake. He had been dragged through the mud, half-clothed, and thrown into this hole. He had not seen the sun in 2 days. The rattle of a key in the lock made him open his eyes. Sheriff Dugan filled the doorway, his bulk blocking the weak light from the outer office. He was holding a tin cup of water, which he sloshed onto the floor near Tahan's cot. "Your breakfast," Dugan said. He leaned against the door frame, chewing on a piece of straw. "You are causing a stir. Tahan, the whole town is buzzing. Silas Pike is a very important man, and you are not." Tahan said nothing. He pushed himself into a sitting position. The room spun, and he clenched his jaw against the sickness. "I am a man of compassion," Dugan continued, his voice a low, confidential rumble. "I see a sick man. I see a misunderstanding that got way out of hand. I have a way for this to end quiet-like. For everyone." He stepped into the cell, his boots scraping on the stone. "The circuit judge is not due for another month. By the time he gets here, Silas Pike will have this town so riled up. They will build a gallows just for you. But if a prisoner was to disappear, say, on a transport that got lost..." He let the implication hang in the damp air. "I could arrange for you to be let out, somewhere north of the county line. You keep riding. You never come back. Silas gets to be the hero who ran you off. The girl's honor is, well, it is what it is. And you get to keep breathing. It is a good deal. The best one you are going to get." Tahan looked at the sheriff, his dark eyes clear and burning, the fever only adding to their intensity. He licked his cracked lips. "I will not run," he said. His voice was a raw whisper, but it filled the cell. "I will not run from a lie." Dugan's lazy, compassionate expression vanished. His face hardened. "You are a fool. Then, a proud, stupid fool. You think you have a choice." "I have the truth," Tahan said. "The truth," Dugan scoffed, turning to leave. "The truth is what Silas Pike says it is. You have until tomorrow. They are moving you to the county seat. The boys escorting you, they are not compassionate." He slammed the heavy door, and the sound of the bolt sliding home was a final, metallic judgment. Evelyn May Carter had not slept. She had returned to the ranch, covered in mud, with a silent, watchful child. She had told her father nothing, and he, terrified of Silas, had asked nothing. She was trapped in her own home, the rescued bride-to-be, the subject of whispers and pitying looks. But it was Jonah's word that haunted her. Pa. He had never said it before. He called her Avi. He had never known his father, her sister's husband, who had died before Jonah was born. Or so she had been told. On the third night, while her father slept the exhausted sleep of a defeated man, Evelyn lit a single lamp. She went to the old carved chest where her mother's things were kept. Her sister Hannah's things were in here, too. She pulled out the heavy family Bible. She opened it, her hands trembling. The pages were brittle. The ink faded. She found the page for births and deaths. Hannah Rose Carter, born 1856, died 1872 of the pox. Below it, in her father's shaky hand, Jonah Carter, born 1871, mother, Hannah Rose, father, unknown. Evelyn's heart ached. Unknown. Her sister had taken that secret to her grave. But then her fingers brushed against a loose paper, tucked deep into the spine. It was a baptismal certificate from a mission church. The ink was watery, blurred by time or tears. Infant Jonah, Mother Hannah, and then a scrawl in the margin. Midwife Rosa Delgado, Santa Elena. Santa Elena, a small, dusty Mexican town, 2 days' ride across the border, known for being a place where people went to disappear. A cold, terrible certainty settled over Evelyn. Jonah's father was not the respectable man her parents had claimed. He was a secret from Santa Elena. And Jonah, with the simple, unerring instinct of a child, had seen Tahan's face, the dark hair, the high cheekbones, the color of his skin, and called him Pa. Not because Tahan was his father, but because he looked like him. This was the root of the lie. This was the secret that had made Jonah's claim so believable. Across the plains, in a lodge that smelled of cedar and sage, Atsa held her hands over the smoke of a small, contained fire. She was not a mystic, but she was a mother, and she knew her son. Tahan was proud. He was quiet. He was not a rapist. Her nephew, Kutsu, paced the lodge. He was a man of action, his anger a hot coal in his chest. "They will hang him," Kutsu said, his voice a low growl, "for looking at a white woman, for a lie." "He will not hang," Atsa said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were not. "This is not about the girl. The girl is the excuse. This is about Silas Pike. This is about the water. This is about the wire." "Then we will cut the wire," Kutsu said, his hand on his knife. "We will burn his barn. We will take our brother back." "And what then?" Atsa said, her sharp gaze pinning him. "You will start a war we cannot win. You will give the cavalry the excuse they have been waiting for. Lieutenant Webb will ride in, and we will all be rounded up." "No." She watched the smoke curl and twist. It was not a vision. It was a thought, focusing her will. "This is a white man's lie," she said, her voice hard. "It must be undone by a white man's truth. Find out when they move him. Watch, but do not act. Not yet." In town, Silas Pike was ensuring his version of the truth was the only one. He stood in the cool, quiet vestry of the church. Father Holt, a small, nervous man, was polishing the silver box that Evelyn had saved. "It was a terrible ordeal, Father," Silas said, his voice full of false sympathy. "To think of that animal, putting his hands on her, in her state. She was not herself, of course. Terrified, bewitched, one might say." "It is a tragedy," Father Holt agreed, polishing faster. "And you," Silas said, his voice hardening just slightly, "you will be called to testify. At the trial, you will tell them what you know, that you sent her on an errand, that she did not return, that she was found the next morning, in that shack, with him, in his bed." Father Holt stopped polishing. He looked ill. "But, Mr. Pike, the circumstances, the storm, perhaps—" "Perhaps what, Father?" Silas's voice was cold now. "Perhaps she went willingly. Perhaps you are suggesting the future Mistress Pike is a common follower of Indians. Is that what you want to tell the town?" No, of course not." "This church," Silas said, tapping the silver box, "sits on land I donated. The new bell I ordered is on its way. The town needs moral clarity. It needs to know that sin is punished. I expect you to provide that clarity. You will tell them what you saw. The simple facts. She was in his bed." Father Holt looked away. "The simple facts?" he whispered. "Yes, I will." Lieutenant Webb read the report from Sheriff Dugan. It was short, crude, and, in Webb's opinion, pure manure. He was a career soldier, a man who believed in chain of command and proper procedure. This entire affair stank. The charge was kidnapping and assault, yet the victim, Miss Carter, had made no statement. The accused was half dead with fever when arrested. The only witnesses were Silas Pike and his hired man. Webb was under strict orders to support the local constabulary and maintain peace. His orders did not require him to like it. He knew Silas Pike was a land-grabbing bully. He also knew Tahan was a proud man, but an honest one, who had guided a cavalry patrol safely through a blizzard last winter. Webb could not interfere with a local criminal matter, not without an order, but he sent a rider to the county seat. with a quiet request for the territorial marshal to observe the transfer. His hands were tied by law, but he did not have to be blind. Evelyn knew Tahan would be moved. She knew Silas would not allow him to remain in dusty crossroads, a living symbol of his humiliation. She had made her choice. It was a terrible, sharp-edged thing. This choice, it meant turning her back on her father, on her name, on the fragile, desperate bargain she had made to save her family. She was about to become a ruined woman, a liar, a fugitive. But she was choosing the truth. She waited until her father left for the saloon. His shoulders slumped. She packed a small bag with bread, cheese, and the small bottle of laudanum from the medicine chest. She took her father's heavy Winchester rifle from the rack. She went to Jonah, who was playing on the floor. "Jonah," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We are going on a ride. You must be very, very quiet. Can you do that for Evie?" He nodded, his big, dark eyes trusting her completely. She put him on the wagon, hidden under a pile of blankets. She drove the wagon not toward town, but toward Lightning Pass, the narrow, twisting cut in the rocks that was the only road to the county seat. She waited for hours, the rifle heavy across her lap. This was madness. She was a 19-year-old girl, playing at being an outlaw. Then she heard it, the rumble of a wagon, the jingle of harness. A single prison wagon, with Mac Rook driving and one other deputy she did not know. Tahan would be shackled inside. Evelyn pulled her wagon sideways, blocking the narrow pass. She stood up, her heart a cold, pounding hammer in her chest. She raised the rifle. Mac Rook pulled the wagon to a halt, his eyes wide, then narrowing in disbelief. "Well, I will be," he drawled, his hand moving toward his pistol. "It is the little bride. Get out of the road. Miss Carter, this is official business." "Let him go," Evelyn said. Her voice did not shake. She could not believe her voice did not shake. "Let Tahan go, Mac." Rook laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You have lost your mind. Girl, he messed with your head proper, did he not? Now get out of the way." From inside the wagon, Tahan heard her voice. He had been expecting kutsu, a wave of arrows, a bloody fight. He had not been expecting this. Evelyn aimed the rifle, not at Mac. She aimed at the large water barrel strapped to the side of his wagon. She fired. The shot echoed like a cannon in the narrow pass. The barrel exploded, sending water and splinters everywhere. The horses reared, screaming. "The next one is for you," she lied. The deputy, his face pale, raised his hands. "Easy, miss, we do not want no trouble." Mac Rook was not scared. He was furious. He raised his pistol to fire at her, but Tahan was ready. He smashed his bound hands against the wagon's backboard, the sudden lurch from the frightened horses giving him the moment he needed. He slammed his shoulder into the weak back door, bursting out of the wagon, chains and all. He landed in the mud, still weak, still sick, but free. Evelyn did not hesitate. She fired again, this time into the rocks above Mac's head, sending a shower of granite chips down onto him. Mac cursed, ducking, trying to control the horses and fire at Tahan at the same time. "Get on!" Evelyn screamed at Tahan, holding her wagon steady. Tahan ran, his chains clanking. He grabbed the side of her wagon and threw himself in, landing hard on the floorboards. "Go, go!" he yelled. Evelyn whipped the horses. The wagon lurched, scraped the canyon wall, and bolted down the pass, back toward the open plains. They rode for an hour, not stopping, not speaking. The sky, which had been a clear, cold blue, turned a bruised, angry purple. A storm was coming. The first drops of rain, hard and cold as pebbles, began to fall. Then it turned to hail. "We have to stop," Evelyn screamed over the roar of the wind. Tahan, his chest heaving, pointed, a shallow overhang, barely a cave, in a rock face. She pulled the wagon in as close as she could. The hail came down in a torrent. Jonah, who had been silent, let out a small, scared cry. Tahan, without thinking, moved, pulling the small boy against him. He grabbed his own shield from the back of the wagon she had brought it. She had brought his shield and held it over them. The ice hammered against the painted buffalo hide, a sound like a war drum. Jonah, sheltered beneath the hawk's image, stopped crying. He put his small hand on the shield, his fingers tracing the painted feathers. Evelyn watched them, her body shaking from cold and fear. They were safe, for now. The worst of the hail passed. In the sudden, cold quiet, Tahan moved. He reached into his wet shirt. He pulled out a piece of fabric. It was crumpled, ripped, and dark with mud. Her wedding veil. He must have grabbed it as they fled, torn it from the barbed wire that held it prisoner. He held it out to her. He did not have the words. He did not need them. She took the ruined lace from his hand. It was a symbol of her old life, her old bargain, and it was ruined, just like her. She looked at him, the sick, chained man she had just freed. He looked at her, the terrified, brave woman who had just ruined herself to do it. "You should not have," Tahan whispered, his voice raw. He was not talking about the veil. "You would not run from the truth," she said, her voice trembling. "Neither will I." He held her gaze. The chemistry between them was not a spark. It was a slow, deep warmth, a recognition. It was dangerous, and it was the only thing holding them together. He was a sick man. She was his rescuer. They were fugitives, and in that cold, shallow cave, as the storm raged over the plains, they were completely and terrifyingly alone. The hail stopped as quickly as it had begun. The sudden, violent quiet was almost as deafening as the storm. In the shallow overhang, they were soaked, freezing, and alive. Tahan was the first to move. He pushed himself away from Jonah, his body rigid with a pain that had nothing to do with the cold. The iron chains, still linking his wrists, were a brutal, heavy weight. "We must get those off," Evelyn said. Her voice was flat, her own shock settling into a hard, practical resolve. She found a heavy tire iron in the back of the wagon, a tool for prying wheels from mud. "Hold still." She wedged the tip of the iron into a chain link and put her foot against his chest for leverage. She pulled. Her muscles screamed. Tahan grunted as the iron bit into his skin, but he held impossibly still, with a sound like a pistol shot. The link snapped. He was free, though his wrists were raw and bleeding. He flexed his hands, his face a mask of pain. The fever was still on him. She could see it in the unnatural brightness of his eyes. "We cannot stay," he said, his voice a rasp. He looked at the wagon. "And we cannot take this. Rook will follow the tracks. He will be here by morning." Evelyn looked at her father's wagon, the last link to her old life. She looked at Jonah, who was asleep, his face pale and tear-stained. "What do we do?" "We ride. We take the horses. We take the food and the rifle," he said. He pointed south to a jagged, saw-toothed ridge of rock that split the plains. "Lightning Spine. It is a game trail. No wagon can follow. It will take us to the river. From there, we can cross into Santa Elena." Santa Elena, the name from the baptismal certificate. It was a sign. "Yes," she said. "We go to Santa Elena." They worked quickly, their hands numb with cold. Tahan, though weak, moved with a grim efficiency. He took the two best horses from the wagon's harness, fashioned rope bridles, and packed the food and ammunition into saddlebags. Evelyn bundled Jonah in the last dry blanket. Tahan lifted the boy, who stirred but did not wake, and placed him in front of Evelyn on her horse. He mounted the other, his movements stiff. He no longer had his shield. It had been left in the wagon. All he had was the clothes on his back, the new, raw wounds on his wrists, and the fever in his blood. He led them into the maze of rocks. Lightning Spine was a path for goats and shadows, not for men. For 2 days, they scrambled over rock falls and slid down scree slopes, the horses' hooves sparking on the flint. Mac Rook was behind them. They did not see him, but Tahan could feel him. Rook was a hunter, and he was on their trail. He would have found the abandoned wagon. He would have seen the tracks. He would be following. Tahan pushed them, and himself, without mercy. He barely spoke. Evelyn watched him, her respect mixing with a new, sharp fear. This was not the calm, still man who had brought mare's milk for her nephew. This was a man running for his life, his fever burning away everything but the will to move. They reached Santa Elena on the 3rd day, not as a town, but as a collection of low, brown adobe houses shimmering in the heat. It was a place that felt forgotten by God. Chickens scattered in the dusty main street. No one looked up as they rode in. This was a town built on secrets, a place for men and women who had run out of other options. Evelyn, carrying Jonah, slid from the horse, her legs buckling. Tahan sat his horse for a moment, swaying. Before he dismounted, they were a pathetic sight, 2 fugitives, a sick child, and nothing left to lose. She found the house from the certificate easily. It was small, but clean, with pots of bright red chili peppers drying in the sun. A woman, old and deeply wrinkled, with eyes as black and sharp as obsidian chips, sat on the porch. This was Rosa Delgado. "We are looking for the midwife," Evelyn said, her voice cracking with dust and exhaustion. "You have found her," the old woman said in Spanish, before switching to rough, heavily accented English. "What you want, I do not deliver babies for. Your kind." She looked at Tahan. "Or his." Evelyn's hope faltered. "Please, my name is Evelyn Carter. My sister, Hannah. You knew her. You delivered her child. This child." She pushed Jonah forward slightly. Rosa Delgado's face went blank. It was a mask, dropping into place. "I know no one of that name." "Please," Evelyn begged. She fumbled in her pocket, her fingers closing on the small, blurred baptismal certificate. She held it out. "I am not here to cause trouble for my sister. She is dead. I am here to save an innocent man. They are trying to hang him. Because of this boy." Rosa looked at the certificate. She looked at Jonah's small, tired face. She looked at Tahan, who stood by the horses, watching, his face a grim stone. Then her sharp eyes returned to Evelyn. She saw the desperation, the torn wedding veil still tied to her bag, the raw honesty in her eyes. "His name is Tahan," Evelyn whispered. They say things, because my nephew, he called him Pa." Rosa's expression softened. "Just a fraction." "Venga," she said, nodding toward the door. "Come inside. The dust is bad for the memory." The inside of the adobe was cool and dark, smelling of herbs and smoke. Rosa gave them water, which Tahan drank as if he were dying. She looked at his fever, at his raw wrists. She clicked her tongue, went to a shelf, and came back with a dark-smelling salve, which she wordlessly handed to Evelyn. Evelyn began to clean and dress his wounds while Rosa spoke. "Hannah," Rosa said, her voice low. "She was a sad girl, pretty, but sad. She came here alone, pregnant and terrified. She would not say who the man was, only that her family would disown her." "But who was he?" Evelyn asked, her hands trembling as she wrapped a clean strip of cloth around Tahan's wrist. "He was not from here. He was a Comanchero," Rosa said. "One of the traders, half Spanish, half your man's people." She nodded at Tahan. "He was beautiful, in a wild way. He had a laugh. Dios, he loved her. And she loved him. He was teaching her his words. He was going to take her away. But he was hot-headed. He got into a fight at the saloon, a card game, a knife. He was dead before the sun set. Evelyn closed her eyes. Her sister's secret life, a tragedy she had never known. Hannah gave birth to the boy a month later. Jonah, she was not strong after that. Then the pox came. It took her. It took so many. Rosa crossed herself. I had a baby, no mother, no father, so I sent word to her family, to your father. I told him he had a grandson. I thought he would do the right thing. He told us she died of the pox, Evelyn whispered. He told us Jonah was the son of a respectable rancher who died. He told us a lie. He took the child to save his name, Rosa said, not unkindly. And now, that child's face is a danger to this man. You have to help us, Evelyn said. You have to tell them the truth. Tell who the sheriff in your town, the man who takes Silas Pike's money, Rosa scoffed. No, a new voice said. A young man stood in the doorway. He was tall, dressed in a clean, dark suit despite the heat. He had an intelligent face and carried a leather satchel. You will tell me, Arturo Diaz. I am an attorney. Rosa smiled. Arturo, I thought you would be interested. Arturo Diaz sat at Rosa's small table, listening. He listened to Evelyn's story of the storm, the line shack, the arrest. He listened to Rosa's story of Hannah and the Comanchero. He examined the certificate. Tahan sat in the corner, silent, his fever finally receding, replaced by a cold, watchful clarity. When they were finished, Diaz sat back, his fingers steepled. This, he said, his voice sharp with anger, is a conspiracy. It is false imprisonment, defamation, and a perversion of the law. Silas Pike is using the law as a weapon. Can you help us? Evelyn asked. I will do more than help, Diaz said. He pulled paper and a pen from his satchel. We will create a sworn affidavit. Rosa, you will tell the truth, and you will sign it. We will prove Tahan's innocence, and we will prove the motive for the accusation. Motive. Jonah, Diaz said. He looked at the boy, who was now asleep on a cot. Silas Pike did not just see a Comanche and a white woman. He saw a child, with a face that looked very much like a Comanche. Calling another man Pa, he assumed the worst, and it gave him the lie he needed. The lie that Tahan had not only defiled you, but had fathered your secret child. But how can we be sure? Evelyn asked. Rosa went to a small wooden box. She came back with a small, dark square of tin, a photograph. She handed it to Evelyn. It was a tintype of a young man, dressed in buckskins and a Spanish-style vest. He was smiling, his head thrown back, his dark hair long. He was not Tahan, but the resemblance was shocking. The high cheekbones, the strong jaw, the proud, wild eyes. He was the man Jonah's heart remembered. That night, they camped by the Red River. Santa Elena was not safe, and Tahan needed to be out, under the sky. The fever had broken, leaving him weak but clear-headed. Diaz had his affidavit. They would ride back at dawn. Jonah was asleep, wrapped in Tahan's blanket. Evelyn and Tahan sat on opposite sides of a small, smokeless fire. The silence between them was full of things. Your hands, she said. The salve had helped, but the skin was raw. She was redressing them, her touch gentle, clinical. He was watching her face in the firelight. You learn, he said, his voice quiet. He picked up a piece of rope. You must learn to secure things, to hold them. He looped the rope, his damaged hands moving with an old, familiar grace. He showed her a diamond hitch, a knot for packing a horse, a knot that would not slip. She fumbled, but she learned. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused and rough. She had learned to fire a rifle, to drive a wagon, to break a chain. Now me, he said. She looked up, confused. He took the folded affidavit from his shirt. He pointed to his name. written at the bottom. Tahan. "What is this?" he asked. It is your name," she said. "It is a shape." He said, "I know the sounds. I do not know the shapes." She felt a pang in her chest. He was a man of such intelligence, such skill, yet he could not read his own name. She took a piece of charcoal from the fire and found a flat piece of slate. She wrote, Tahan. He traced the letters with his finger. His touch, which had been so sure on the rope, was hesitant, a child's touch. "Tahan," he said, his voice full of a strange wonder. She taught him Evelyn and Jonah. They sat there, by the fire, a fugitive Comanche and a ruined woman, teaching each other a new language, a language of shapes. The air between them was thick. He had been watching her, not with the gratitude of a man rescued, but with something deeper. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, a touch as light as a moth's wing. It was not the touch of a savage. It was the touch of a man who was seeing, for the first time, the woman who had seen him. "You saved my life," he whispered. "You saved mine," she whispered back. "In the storm, you came back." I had to." He leaned in. It was a slow, hesitant movement. It was not a kiss of passion or of lust. It was a kiss of pure, desperate connection, a kiss that tasted of wood smoke, dust, and survival. It was a promise that, in a world of lies, they had found this one. Simple truth. It lasted only a moment, but it changed everything. She pulled back, her breath catching. He looked at her, his eyes dark and serious. He did not apologize. He just accepted it. They sat for a long time. They were preparing to ride back into the heart of the trouble. The danger was not over. It was just beginning. "When this is over?" she asked, her voice small, afraid of the answer. If we clear your name, will you go? Will you leave?" Tahan looked at the fire. He looked at the sleeping child. He looked at her, his woman, the one who had taught him his name. "No," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was an oath. "I will not go. I will stay where you and the truth are." Back in Dusty Crossroads, Silas Pike was not waiting. He had $500 in gold coin on the saloon bar. "Dead or alive," he announced to the crowd of drinkers. "For the kidnapper, Tahan." Sheriff Dugan, his eyes on the gold, went to the telegraph office. He wired the county judge, claiming Tahan was the head of a new uprising, a danger to the territory. Then he went to Lieutenant Webb, a forged warrant in his hand. "It is official, Lieutenant," Dugan said, his face a mask of regret. "From the judge himself. He escaped federal custody. I need your signature to authorize a full cavalry pursuit." Lieutenant Webb, a man of law, a man of paper, read the forged order. He frowned, but it was a judge's order. He signed it. The hunt was no longer a posse. It was the law. They rode into Dusty Crossroads as the sun was beginning to lose its midday fury. It was market day. The main street, usually a sleepy river of dust, was clogged with wagons, horses, and the townsfolk who had come in for supplies. They made a strange procession, a young lawyer in a dark suit, an old Mexican woman in a black shawl, a bleeding, exhausted Comanche, and a woman who was supposed to be a bride, her hair undone, holding a small, watchful child on her lap. Silence fell as they rode in. It was not a respectful silence. It was the hush of a crowd turning to stare. A sudden, collective intake of breath. Whispers followed them, sharp and stinging as hornets. "That is her. Look, he is back. She has gone with the Indian." Tahan kept his eyes forward, his face a mask of pained stillness. The wound in his arm, hastily bandaged by Evelyn, throbbed with every step of the horse. He was weak, but his spine was straight. Evelyn sat beside him on the horse, her chin high, her arm protectively around Jonah. She refused to look like a victim. Arturo Diaz and Rosa Delgado rode a few paces behind, their faces set with a grim purpose. They stopped in the very center of the street, in front of the sheriff's office. The boardwalk was full, and, as if on cue, the doors of the saloon swung open. Silas Pike stepped out, followed by Mac Rook and Sheriff Dugan. Silas had been drinking. His face was flushed, his eyes dangerously bright. He saw them, and a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "Well, well," Silas boomed, his voice carrying across the silent street. "The prodigals return. Sheriff Dugan, it seems your prisoner has come back, along with the harlot who helped him escape. Do your duty. Arrest them all." Dugan moved, his hand on his pistol. "Tahan, you are under arrest for escaping." "On what authority?" "Sheriff," Arturo Diaz's voice was sharp, clear, and cut through the tension. He dismounted, his leather satchel in his hand. "My client was never indicted. He was not formally charged. He was being held illegally. He has not escaped anything, because he was never lawfully held." A murmur went through the crowd. This was new. Law talk. Diaz stepped onto the boardwalk, his slight frame defiant. "My name is Arturo Diaz. I am an attorney. We are not here to surrender. We are here to present exculpatory evidence to the ranking federal authority." His eyes found Lieutenant Webb, who was standing by the post office, his face like stone, watching. Silas Pike laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Evidence, lawyer. You think your paper tricks matter here. Boy, this animal." He pointed a thick finger at Tahan. "Kidnapped my bride. He defiled her. He brought shame to her, to me, to this entire town. He does not deserve a lawyer. He deserves a rope." "That is a lie." The voice was not Diaz's. It was Evelyn's. She slid from the horse, holding Jonah's hand. She stood in the red dust of the street, her dress torn and stained, her face pale but for 2 spots of angry color on her cheeks. She looked at Silas Pike. She looked at the crowd, at the women who had been her neighbors, who were now staring at her with judgment. "I am not his bride," she shouted, her voice ringing with a strength she did not know she possessed. The town went utterly, profoundly still. This was the one thing no one had expected. "He did not kidnap me," Evelyn continued, her voice gaining power. "He did not defile me. I am a virgin. As God is my witness, this wedding was a business deal, a lie. He bought my father's debt. He was buying me. I am not, and I have never been, his wife." The gasp from the crowd was a physical thing, like a wind. Her own father, standing on the edge of the crowd, looked like he might faint. Silas Pike's face turned a shade of purple. "She is hysterical," he spat. "She is bewitched. She does not know what she is saying. Mac—" He did not need to finish. Mac Rook had been waiting. This was his language. He drew his pistol, his movements smooth and practiced. He was not aiming for a warning. He was aiming for Tahan's heart. It all happened in the space of a single, terrible breath. Jonah, who had been clutching Evelyn's hand, saw the gun. He saw the threat to the man who looked like his father, the man who had held him, the man he had called Pa. He did not think. He was a child. He was terrified. "Pa!" he screamed, and he broke free from Evelyn's grasp, running forward, a tiny, desperate figure, right into the open space between Rook and Tahan. Evelyn screamed. Mac Rook, his finger already tightening, did not stop. Tahan moved. He was not a man anymore. He was the hawk on his grandfather's shield. Despite the fever, despite the wound, he launched himself off the horse, a blur of motion. He threw himself in front of Jonah, grabbing the boy, twisting his body to shield him. The gun roared. The sound was deafening. Tahan cried out, a sharp, grunting sound of impact. He stumbled, but he did not fall. He held Jonah tight, his back to Mac Rook. blood, dark and sudden, exploded from his left shoulder, high near the collarbone, soaking his shirt. "Hold your fire!" Lieutenant Webb's voice was a cannon shot. He had his own pistol out, aimed not at a man, but at the sky. "Stand down," I said. "Stand down. All of you." Tahan turned, his face white with pain, but his eyes blazing. He was holding Jonah, who was sobbing in terror. The boy was unharmed. "He used the boy as a shield," Sheriff Dugan bellowed, trying to turn the narrative, trying to salvage the moment. "He is a coward. He is a kidnapper." "That is a lie." Arturo Diaz was on the boardwalk now, his voice shaking with pure, righteous fury. He pulled Rosa Delgado forward. "This is the truth. This woman is Rosa Delgado, a sworn midwife. She is here to tell the truth." Diaz held up the signed affidavit. "This is a sworn statement, witnessed and notarized. It testifies that the boy, Jonah Carter, is not Tahan's son. He is Evelyn Carter's nephew. His mother was Hannah Carter. His father was a Comanchero who died in Santa Elena before the boy was born." He did not stop. He held up the small, dark tintype. "And this is Jonah's father, look. Look at this man's face. This is why the boy was confused. This is the man his heart remembers." A surge went through the crowd. People pushed forward, craning their necks to see the tintype, to see the old Mexican woman who was now weeping. "Es la verdad, the truth of God. I was there. I delivered the child." The entire story of the town, the one they had been telling themselves for a week, cracked and fell apart. The whispers changed. They were not against Evelyn. They were against Silas. He had not been defending his honor. He had been covering a lie. He had been willing to see a man hang for it. Silas Pike saw it. He saw the doubt in the eyes of his own men. He saw the cold, disgusted look on Lieutenant Webb's face. He had lost control. He had lost the crowd. He bellowed, a wounded, furious animal. He jabbed a trembling finger at Diaz, at Webb, at the whole town. "I do not care what your filthy paper says. I do not care what this old witch babbles. I built this town. I paid for that badge." He jabbed his finger at Dugan, who flinched. "My law is the law here." A dead, cold silence. He had said it. He had admitted it. The bribery, the corruption. He had admitted it all. In the street, in front of everyone. The crowd physically split. The rougher element, the hired guns and the saloon rats, stayed where they were, near Silas, their hands on their guns. But the shopkeepers, the blacksmith, the railroad families, the women, they moved, almost as one. They crossed the street, creating a human barrier, a new line, standing near Evelyn and the wounded Tahan. The main street of Dusty Crossroads was now a physical map of its own divided soul. Lieutenant Webb holstered his pistol, his face grim. "Sheriff Dugan, your deputy, Mac Rooks, has discharged his weapon into a public thoroughfare, wounding an unarmed man who was protecting a child, under territorial law. I am placing him under military arrest for inciting a riot and attempted murder." Two of his blue-uniformed men stepped forward and seized Rook, who was too stunned to resist. "Silas," Webb said, his voice flat and cold. "The legal matter seems to be resolved. This affidavit proves Tahan's innocence of the charge. As of this moment, he is a free man." Silas Pike stared at him. His face was a terrible mask of hatred. He looked at Tahan, who was now leaning heavily on Evelyn, his blood staining her dress. He looked at Evelyn, and his eyes promised that this was not over. This was only the beginning. Without another word, he turned, pulled himself onto his horse, and rode out of town. His few remaining men followed him, a small, dark cloud of menace. Tahan was still on his feet. Evelyn was tearing a strip from her petticoat, her hands shaking as she tried to staunch the bleeding. Jonah was clinging to Tahan's leg, his small face buried in the bloody buckskin. They had won. The law had, finally, bent toward the truth. But as Tahan looked at the blood pooling in the dust, and at the departing back of Silas Pike, he knew they were not safe. They had won the paper war. The war of kith and kin, of blood and barbed wire, had just been declared. Silas Pike had not just lost a legal fight, he had lost face, and in the Texas Panhandle, a man's face was his currency. To be publicly undone by a girl, a lawyer, and an Indian was not an insult. It was a declaration of war. He did not retreat to lick his wounds. He retreated to reload. Within 2 days, they arrived. They were not cowhands. They were 3 men from the Pinkerton agency, dressed in dark, ill-fitting city suits, their faces devoid of emotion. They looked at the red dust with quiet, professional disdain. They were not here for honor. They were here for a paycheck. The wounded were at the Carter Ranch. Tahan's shoulder was a deep, searing valley of pain. Rosa Delgado had stayed, her knowledge of herbs and wounds proving more valuable than any town doctor. She had dug the bullet out, stitched him with a horsehair needle, and packed the wound with a peppery-smelling poultice. Atsa, his mother, had come as well, her presence a silent, powerful anchor. She and Rosa worked side by side, 2 old women who understood the world's hard edges, sharing a language of medicine that needed no translation. Evelyn, Tahan, Jonah, Atsa, and Rosa. They had formed a strange, new family, a small island in the center of a storm. Evelyn's father, Thomas, had vanished into town, too terrified of Silas to stay, too ashamed to leave. On the 3rd morning, Kutsu arrived, his horse lathered. He was not wearing paint, but his face was a mask of cold fury. "He has done it," Kutsu said, his voice a low growl. He was speaking to Atsa, but his eyes were on Tahan. "He has wired the spring. He and his new men." Tahan forced himself to his feet. He and Evelyn walked to the rise. They could see it, even from a mile away. The new, sharp, ugly lines of barbed wire. The spools that had sat at the railroad depot were now a cage. Silas Pike had fenced the shared water. He had not just fenced his side, he had fenced it all, cutting off the Comanche herd from the only fresh water for 10 miles. In this drought, it was not a fence, it was a death sentence. "It is a war for water," Atsa said, her voice quiet. She had joined them. "He means to kill our horses. Then he will kill us." "I will not let him," Kutsu said. "We ride, we cut the wire, we take what is ours." Tahan was torn. His body ached. His duty to his cousin, to his mother, to his people, was to ride with them, to fight. But his eyes went to Evelyn, and to Jonah, who was playing in the dirt at her feet. If he rode, he would leave them here, unprotected, a perfect, waiting target for Silas. "You cannot go," Evelyn said, her voice low. She was not pleading. She was stating a fact. "You are in no shape to fight, and he wants this. He wants you to attack. He wants Kutsu to attack. He has the law and the Pinkertons waiting. He is daring you to start a fight so he can finish it." "She is right," Atsa said, placing a hand on Kutsu's arm. "He has set a trap. He uses paper. Then he uses wire. Now he uses our own honor against us." Tahan looked at his mother, his heart a heavy stone. "What do we do?" Evelyn May Carter knew what she had to do. She had been a pawn in a man's game, a piece of property to be traded. No more. She turned without a word and walked back to the house. She returned holding a small bundle. It was the ruined, mud-stained, ripped lace of her wedding veil. She looked at Tahan, and her eyes were full of a fire that matched his. "Protect Jonah," she said. "I will be back." She rode into dusty crossroads alone. She did not go to the church. She did not go to her father. She rode to the center of town, where the public feed trough and a communal burn barrel stood. It was mid-morning. The town was alive. She dismounted. She stood by the rusty barrel. She held up the ruined veil. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. "This," she cried out, her voice ringing. is what Silas Pike thinks of honor. This is the lie he tried to buy me with." People stopped. They turned. Sheriff Dugan, who had been released by Webb pending an inquiry, stepped out of his office, his face blotchy. "Mr. Pike offered me in trade for my father's debt," she shouted, playing to the women, to the shopkeepers who had been squeezed by Silas. "He tried to buy my water, and he tried to buy my body, and when I would not be bought, he tried to have an innocent man murdered." "That is enough. Miss Carter," Dugan blustered, moving toward her. "You are hysterical. You are inciting." "I am not his," she screamed, stepping away from him. "I am not your property, and I will not be silent." She held the veil over the burn barrel. "This is his bargain. This is his honor." She opened her fingers. The lace, a symbol of her trapped past, fell into the barrel. It caught the embers from the farrier's shop. It smoked, and then it burst into a bright, sudden, angry flame. "I am a free woman," she said, her voice dropping, but carrying in the sudden, shocked silence. "And I choose the truth." She turned, mounted her horse, and rode back to the ranch, leaving the town to choke on its own silence. The standoff at the spring began an hour later. Kutsu, Tahan, and 10 other Comanche men rode to the fence line. They did not come for war. They came with wire cutters. Atsa was with them, riding on a pony, her face set. Evelyn had insisted on coming, with Jonah on the saddle in front of her. They were a family. They would not be separated. Silas was waiting. His 3 Pinkertons were there, holding new repeating rifles. Sheriff Dugan was there, his badge looking like a joke, his hand on his gun, and behind them, a line of blue. Lieutenant Webb and 20 cavalrymen sat their horses, trapped between the law and what was right. "This is private property," Silas Pike yelled, his voice carrying on the wind. "That fence is legal. I have the deed. Lieutenant Webb, I order you to remove these trespassers." Webb rode his horse forward into the gap. "Tahan Kutsu, I have my orders. This land is under dispute, but the fence is on Mr. Pike's deeded line. You cannot cut that wire." "Lieutenant," Tahan said, his voice pained, his sling a stark white against his dark skin. "Our horses are dying. This is our water. It has been our water since the world was new. That wire is an act of murder." "That is a civil matter," Webb said, his voice full of a weary disgust. "I am here to prevent bloodshed. I am ordering you to disperse." "And if we do not," Kutsu said, his hand on his knife. "Then I will be forced to arrest you," Webb said. Silas Pike laughed. It was a short, triumphant bark. He had won. He had cornered them with the white man's law. "No," Atsa said. Her quiet voice cut through the tension. She rode her small pony forward, past Tahan, past Kutsu. She rode right up to the line of blue-coated soldiers. She looked up at Lieutenant Webb, a small, wrinkled woman with the authority of a mountain. "We are the Numunu," she said, using the name for her people. "We are here. This is our land. You are the trespasser. Your paper law is a wind that blows away. But the water remains." She reached down, took the wire cutters from Kutsu's hand, and leaned down from her pony. She was going to cut the wire herself. "No!" Mother Tahan shouted, moving forward. "Arrest her!" Silas snarled. It was Dugan. He had been waiting for this. He was not a sheriff. He was not even a man. He was a coward, full of bile and Silas's money. He saw Tahan move, saw him as the source of all his humiliation. He drew his pistol, not at the old woman, but at the son. He aimed for Tahan's back. Atsa saw it. She was a mother. She saw the glint of the gun, the shift in Dugan's eyes. She saw the betrayal. It happened in a single terrible moment. "Tahan!" she screamed, her voice a warning. She spurred her pony, shoving it sideways, putting herself between her son and the gun. Dugan fired. The shot was flat and ugly in the sudden, terrible silence. Atsa did not cry out. She made a small sound, a sigh, as the bullet hit her in the chest. She looked at Tahan, her eyes wide, a look of surprise, and a deep, terrible love. Then she slid from the pony and fell into the red dust, onto the barbed wire. The world stopped. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The soldiers, the Comanche, the Pinkertons, they just stared. Tahan stared. He saw his mother, tangled in the devil's rope, a dark stain spreading on her dress. The sound that came out of him was not human. It was a roar of such profound animal grief and rage that the horses reared. He forgot his wound. He forgot the soldiers. He launched himself from his horse, but not at Silas. He went for Dugan. Dugan was fumbling, trying to reload, his face a mask of pure, idiotic terror. Tahan hit him like a striking hawk. He did not use his rifle. He used his hands, his knife. He was on Dugan's chest, the man's head slamming against a railroad tie. Tahan's knife was at Dugan's throat. Blood, Atsa's blood, was on his hands. He was going to kill him. He raised the knife, his entire body shaking with a force that would split the world. He saw his mother's face. He heard her voice, not from the dust, but from his memory, from a lifetime of her teaching. Do not let your hatred become the law, my son. It is a poor master. His hand was shaking. The knife was at Dugan's throat. The man had wet himself, sobbing. Tahan roared again, but it was a roar of agony, not of rage. He threw the knife away. He did not kill him. He stood up, shaking, and turned his back on the man. He went to his mother. Lieutenant Webb had his pistol in Dugan's face. "You are under arrest." Webb's voice was shaking. He was so angry. "For murder. I saw it. You fired against my direct order. You murdered an unarmed woman." He motioned to his men. "Take this filth away." Tahan was on his knees in the dust. He was gently, his hands trembling, untangling his mother from the wire. The barbs had torn her clothes, her skin. Blood was on the wire. Silas Pike, seeing it all, did not wait. His Pinkertons were already melting back, their job done. In the chaos of the arrest, Silas Pike turned his horse and, at a calm, unhurried pace, he rode away. He had lost his sheriff, but he had taken Tahan's mother. He was, for now, content. A cold, unseasonable rain began to fall, the final rain of the season. It began to wash the dust and the blood from the ground. Tahan knelt, cradling his mother's head in his lap. His face, his heart, was broken. He had nothing left. Evelyn came to him. She knelt beside him in the mud. Jonah was with her, his small face a mask of terror. She said nothing. There were no words. She put her arms around him, holding him as he began to shake, his body finally surrendering to the grief. He turned, his face buried in her shoulder, and he wept. He wept for his mother, for his people, for the water, for the world he was losing. She held him, her own tears streaming, her cheek against his hair. It was not a kiss. It was not a lover's embrace. It was the desperate, clinging hold of two survivors in the wreckage, under a weeping sky. This was their vow. This was the true, painful, bloody wedding of their souls. The grief was a cold, heavy stone. They had buried Atsa on the rise, wrapped in her blankets, facing the east. Tahan had not spoken in 2 days. He sat in the damaged barn, the smell of smoke still clinging to the scorched timbers, his hands mechanically braiding a new rein for ghost wind. He was a hollowed-out man, his body healing from the bullet, but his spirit flayed open. Evelyn watched him from the house. Her heart ached with a pain that was twofold for the woman who had died for her son, and for the man who was now trapped inside his own silent rage. Kutsu and 3 other Comanche men were camped by the creek, a silent, watchful perimeter. They were all waiting. Silas Pike had vanished, but he was not gone. A man like that did not simply leave. He was a cancer, and he had not been cut out. The first sign of the alliance came at dusk. 2 riders, ranchers from the valley over. They were not Silas's men. They were smallholders, like her father. One was a broad-shouldered man named Jed, the other a younger, leaner man called Tobin. They dismounted at the fence line, hats in hand. "Miss Carter," Jed said, his voice a low rumble. He did not look at Tahan in the barn. He kept his eyes respectfully on her. We come to pay respects for the woman, and for what happened in town." Evelyn nodded, her throat tight. "What's Silas Pike done?" Tobin added, his gaze flicking to the cavalry patrol on the horizon. "It was not white. It was not right. He has pushed us all. That fence. That was madness. We just want you to know, ma'am, you and yours, you are not alone in this." "Thank you," Evelyn whispered. "That means more than you know." "We will be at our post," Jed said. "A quiet promise. We see anything, we will let you know. Good night, ma'am." They rode off, a small, decent point of light in a darkening world. That night, the wind changed. It came from the north, dry and cold, smelling of dust and distance. Evelyn put Jonah to bed. The boy was subdued, his small face full of questions she could not answer. "Is Atsa in the sky now?" he asked, his voice small. Evelyn choked back a sob. "Yes, darling, she is in the sky, watching. Like Pa." Her heart stopped. She looked at him. "Yes, Jonah, just like him." She kissed him and went to the main room, her father's rifle resting by the door. She was not a fool. She would not be caught unprepared. The smell of smoke came first, not the cedar from Kutsu's campfire. This was the acrid, oily smell of coal oil and hay. She looked out the window. The world was red. The barn was not just burning, it was exploding. A wall of flame leaped into the night, bright as a new, terrible sun. "Tahan!" she screamed, grabbing the rifle, her heart stopping. But Tahan was already moving. He burst from the inferno. Not in retreat, but in attack. He was wrestling with a man. A city man in a dark suit. One of the Pinkertons. The fire had been the bait, a trap to smoke him out. Evelyn raised the rifle. But another man, Silas Pike, stepped from the shadow of the house. He was not looking at the barn. He was looking at her. "Drop it, girl," Silas said. He was holding a pistol. He was calm. This was his final move. Evelyn saw Tahan slam the Pinkerton's head against the water trough. A terrible, final sound. He was turning. "No, you do not! Savage!" Silas snarled. He fired, not at Tahan, but at the ground near his feet, kicking up dirt. "Stay, or I will kill her. Then I will kill the boy." Evelyn saw the madness in his eyes. He had lost his land, his pride, his reputation. He had nothing left but this, his hatred. "You wanted this, girl," Silas said, his voice a low, terrifying croon. "You wanted to be with the Indian. You will be, in hell." But it was a feint. As Tahan took a step, Silas lunged, not for Evelyn, but for the door. He kicked it open. Jonah, woken by the shot, was standing in the hallway, his eyes wide with terror. Before Evelyn could move, Silas had scooped the boy up. "The bait," he hissed. He slammed the door, ran to his horse, and threw Jonah onto the saddle. Evelyn fired the rifle. The shot went wide, breaking a window. "Jonah!" she screamed, a sound of pure maternal agony. Tahan heard that scream. It cut through his rage, through his grief. He saw Silas, a dark shape on his black horse, the small, pale form of the boy in his arms. Riding fast, he was heading for the Badlands, for Coyote Ridge. Tahan was on Ghost Wind in a single, fluid motion. He did not have a saddle. He did not have a rifle. He had only the horse and the knife in his boot. Kutsu and his men were already on their horses, drawn by the fire. The two ranchers, Jed and Tobin, were riding hard from the south. "He has the boy," Tahan roared, his voice breaking. "He is heading for the ridge." "We ride!" Kutsu yelled. Evelyn was on her own horse, the rifle in her hand. "He is my son," she said, her face a pale, determined mask. Tahan did not argue. He just rode. They were a strange posse. 3 Comanche men, their faces grim, 2 white ranchers, their expressions hard, and Tahan and Evelyn, bound by a grief and a terror that was stronger than any law. Coyote Ridge was a wound in the earth, a place of sharp rocks and dry grass. The fire, carried by the wind, was racing them, turning the night into a flickering, red-black hell. They saw him, Silas, on the ridge, his horse laboring. He was trapped, the fire moving to cut him off. But he knew a way, a narrow chasm, a shortcut to the old line camp. "He is going for the cut," Jed yelled over the roar of the wind. "Go around," Tahan shouted at Kutsu. "Meet him on the other side. I will cut him off." Tahan broke from the group. He and Ghost Wind were one, a gray streak against the burning grass. They were not just riding. They were a pure, focused arrow of vengeance. He saw Silas reach the chasm. It was 20 feet across, a black, gaping mouth. Silas was on the far side, reining in his horse. He looked back. He saw Tahan. He laughed, a wild, high sound. He held Jonah up. "Too late, Indian," he screamed. "You will watch him burn." Tahan did not slow. He did not hesitate. He felt Ghost Wind beneath him, the powerful muscles gathering. He put his trust, his life, his soul, into the horse. He spurred him. Ghost Wind leaped. It was not a jump. It was an act of faith, a flight. For a single, eternal second, they were airborne, a gray ghost sailing over the blackness, the red fire their only light. They landed hard. The horse stumbled, its knees buckling, but it did not fall. Silas Pike's face, in the firelight, was a mask of pure disbelief. He fired his pistol. The bullet went wide, whining off the rocks. Tahan was off the horse before it stopped moving. He grabbed Silas, tackling him from the saddle, his other hand seizing Jonah. He rolled, his body a shield, protecting the boy as they hit the hard, rocky ground. He came up, pushing Jonah behind him. "Evelyn," he yelled. She was there, riding up, her face a white mask of terror. "Take him. Get him clear." Silas was on his feet. He had lost the boy, but he still had the gun. He was a cornered rat, and he knew it. He saw Evelyn. "No," he hissed. He grabbed her as she ran for Jonah, yanking her back, his arm around her throat, the muzzle of his pistol pressed hard against her temple. "It ends now," Silas gasped, his chest heaving. "You took it all. You and your savage. You will die first." Tahan stood 10 feet away. He was unarmed. His knife was gone, lost in the fall. He was panting, his shoulders screaming in pain. "Let her go. Pike," Tahan said. His voice was deathly calm. "I will kill her," Silas whispered, his eyes wide and mad. "Then the boy, then you." Tahan attacked. He did not make a sound. He was a silent, uncoiling shadow. He crossed the 10 feet in 2 long, desperate strides, grabbing the gun hand, forcing it up. The gun fired, the shot exploding harmlessly into the sky. They struggled. It was not a fight. It was a primal, brutal dance of hatred. Tahan, weak from his wounds, was driven by a force Silas could not comprehend. He felt Tahan's hands, like iron, on his wrist. He heard a sound, a sharp, wet snap. His wrist was broken. The gun clattered to the ground. Tahan hit him, a closed fist blow to the jaw that snapped Silas's head back. He hit him again. Silas fell. Tahan was on top of him, his hands on his throat. The rage was pure, black, and bottomless. He was squeezing. He saw Atsa's face, her eyes wide as she fell onto the wire. He saw the barn, burning. He saw Jonah's terror. He squeezed, his thumbs digging deep into the man's throat. Silas's face was turning purple. His eyes were bulging, pleading. Tahan Evelyn screamed. Her voice was not a plea. It was an anchor in the storm. "Tahan, do not Do not become him. He froze. His hands were shaking. He could feel the man's life thrumming and failing beneath his palms. He heard his mother's voice, clear as a bell. Do not let your hatred become the law. He looked at the pathetic, gasping, choking thing beneath him. This was not a man. This was an animal. But he was not. With a roar of pure, agonizing self-control, Tahan released his grip. He stood up, his whole body shaking. Justice! The voice was calm. Lieutenant Webb stood at the edge of the clearing, 2 soldiers behind him. He had followed the fire. He had seen the chase. He had seen the gun. He had seen the choice. Silas Pike was on the ground, coughing, gasping for air. He saw the blue uniforms. He saw the soldiers. He was beaten, done. He tried to scramble away, to crawl backward. He scrambled, his good hand pushing him, his broken one dragging. He did not see the coil of rusted metal, left from an old fence line, lying in the shadows. His foot caught. He tripped, his body lurching backward. He fell, a clumsy, sprawling fall, over the edge of the ridge. He gave a single, wet scream. He did not fall far. The barbed wire, his own wire, left there years ago, caught him. It snagged his clothes, his flesh. He was tangled, a grotesque puppet, dangling, his broken body impaled on the rusted barbs. He was held fast, trapped by the very law he had used to terrorize them all. Lieutenant Webb walked to the edge. He looked down at the writhing, trapped man. He did not offer a hand. He looked at Tahan, at the man who had chosen not to kill. Tonight, Lieutenant Webb said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a final judgment. Justice belongs to those who draw their lines with humanity. A man, sometimes, is caught by his own fence. They did not speak on the ride back. The fire was dying. The soldiers had stayed behind to deal with the thing on the ridge. They sat by the ruins of the barn, a small, clean fire pushing back the new, cold dawn. Kutsu and the others were gone. Jed and Tobin were gone. It was just Tahan, Evelyn, and Jonah, who was asleep, safe, in her arms. "It is over," Evelyn whispered, the words lost in the smoke. "No," Tahan said. He looked at her, his eyes clear for the first time since his mother's death. The rage was gone, burned out. "It is beginning." He held out his hand, his left hand. She placed her right hand in his. His was scarred and rough. Hers was small, but strong. From his boot, he pulled not a knife, but a single, thin, strong strip of tanned leather. "My mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She told me of the old way, when a man and a woman find their home in each other." He wrapped the leather strip, his movements sure and slow. He bound his wrist to hers. "I am Tahan," he whispered, his vow spoken to her, to the wind, to the new day. "I am not just of the New Munu. I am of this land, your land. I am of Jonah. I am of you." Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face, washing away the soot and the grief. "And I," she whispered back, her voice shaking, "am not just Evelyn Carter. I am Evelyn, of you. I am your home, as you are mine." He leaned in. It was not a kiss of passion, or of discovery. It was a kiss of arrival. It was slow and deep, and it tasted of smoke and salt and survival. It was a promise, sealed in the ashes, that they would, together, build something new. He held her, his arms around her and the child. Their hands were bound. They watched the first, clean light of the sun burn away the shadows of Coyote Ridge. The law, it turned out, was a slow, grinding thing. But the fire on Coyote Ridge had burned away the lies that clogged its gears. Silas Pike's body was cut down from the barbed wire by Lieutenant Webb's men. He was not dead. His fall had been broken by the wires, but at a terrible cost. He was a ruined man, his legs shattered, his broken wrist a useless, flapping thing. He was taken to the military infirmary, not as a patient, but as a prisoner. Lieutenant Webb had filed the charges himself: kidnapping, arson, and conspiracy to commit murder. The weight of the federal government had come down on him. His money was frozen. His power was gone. Sheriff Dugan had been transported to the county seat in the same wagon he had intended for Tahan, his wrists in military irons. He would face a federal marshal for the murder of Atsa. Mac Rook was in the cell next to him. The reign of bought and paid for justice in dusty crossroads was over. On Sunday, the church was full. It was not a normal service. It was a town meeting, called by Father Holt. He stood at the pulpit, his face pale, his hands shaking. No longer a man cowed by power, but a man broken by his own weakness. Evelyn, Tahan, and Jonah sat in the front pew. Kutsu and 3 other Comanche men stood in the back, a silent, watchful presence. Jed and Tobin and their families sat near the front, a new, public line of alliance. "I have failed this community," Father Holt began, his voice cracking. "I have failed God. I was a coward." He did not make excuses. He told them of Silas Pike's threats, of his own fear, of the lie he had been prepared to tell. He publicly asked for Evelyn's forgiveness. Evelyn, her hand held tightly by Tahan, stood. "There is nothing to forgive. Father, there is only a need to rebuild." Then Arturo Diaz stepped forward. He was no longer a nervous young lawyer. He was an agent of the new order. He held a stack of papers. "By order of the territorial court," he announced, his voice ringing. "The marriage contract between Evelyn May Carter and Silas Pike is declared null and void. It was an agreement made under duress and financial conspiracy, and it was never consummated. It is, by law, as if it never happened." A collective sigh of relief went through the room. "Furthermore," Diaz continued, "I have here a new legal birth certificate for Jonah Carter." He held it up. It lists his mother as Hannah Rose Carter, deceased, his father as unknown. But it is his name, his own name. He is the legal ward of his aunt, Miss Evelyn Carter. His identity, his right to be here, is no longer a question. It is a fact of law. Lastly, he spoke of the land. Silas Pike's holdings are to be auctioned by the federal marshals to pay his debts. His creditors, including the bank he used to threaten Thomas Carter, have first claim. The Pike empire is finished. A new, cleaner air filled the church. The weight of the last few months had been lifted. But the most important meeting did not happen in the church. It happened by the spring, under the open sky. Tahan was there, his arm in a clean sling. Kutsu was beside him. Jed and Tobin represented the ranchers, and Lieutenant Webb was there, not as a soldier, but as a mediator, a witness for the government. "The wire must go," Kutsu said, his voice flat. It was not a request. "It is gone," Jed said. "My men and I pulled it this morning. We found 2 of our own cows tangled in it. Pike was a fool. That wire, it does not care whose animal it cuts." "The water is life," Tahan said, his voice quiet, but full of his mother's authority. "It cannot be owned. It must be shared." He had spent the night thinking, not of what was lost, but of what must be built. He did not want war. He wanted peace, a peace Atsa had paid for. "My people," Tahan said, "will bring our herds in the morning. Your cattle drink in the afternoon. We will dig a second trough, a lower one, for the wild things, for the deer and the antelope. No animal, red or white, should die of thirst." Jed looked at Tobin. It was a fair, simple, and wise plan. "And the land?" Jed asked. "The land will be auctioned," Webb said. "But the spring? I think the government can be persuaded to declare the spring itself a protected, neutral territory, a shared resource, with this agreement as its charter." "One more thing," Tahan said. "No more barbed wire, not near the water. If you must fence, use wood, use rails, a fence a horse can see, a fence that does not cut." Jed held out his hand. "We are ranchers. Tahan, not monsters. We agree. No more wire. We will share the water." Tahan took his hand. Kutsu took his hand. A new law, a law of humanity, had been written on the land, not by paper, but by a handshake. On the rise where Atsa was buried, Tahan and Kutsu built the memorial. They did not build a cross. They raised a single, tall pole of seasoned cedar, as his people did. They carved it with the sign of the hawk and the sign of the flowing water. It was a marker of her life, a message to the wind. Evelyn came alone, while Tahan was standing there, his hand on the wood. She was holding the small, scorched, mud-stained bundle of lace, her veil. She knelt at the base of the pole. She looked up at Tahan, her eyes full of tears she would not let fall. "She was a mother to me," Evelyn whispered. "In the barn, in the storm. She was a mother to me when she rode to the wire. I have nothing to give her, but this." She placed the burnt lace among the stones at the base of the memorial. "It was the symbol of my prison." She said, "Now it is a symbol of my freedom, the freedom she bought for us. I want to leave the lie here, with the truth." Tahan knelt beside her. He placed his hand over hers, pressing the lace to the cool stones. He said nothing. He did not need to. He simply shared the weight of it, and in sharing, made it lighter. Lieutenant Webb's official report was not what the cavalry expected. He wrote of Dugan's corruption and murder. He wrote of Pike's conspiracy. But he spent 2 pages on the cause. He wrote of a community driven to madness by greed and a new, brutal technology. He wrote of Evelyn Carter's extraordinary moral and physical courage. He wrote of Tahan's remarkable diplomacy and restraint in the face of profound personal tragedy. He did not just request a commendation. He requested a budget. "It is my belief," he wrote, "that the pen is a more effective tool for peace than the carbine. I request discretionary funds to establish a pilot school on the frontier, a place where the children of this divided land can learn a common language. Integration, not subjugation, is the only path to a lasting peace." They did not wait for the army's money. The barn was a ruin of charred bones. Tahan, Kutsu, Jed, Tobin, and 3 other men, Comanche and white, worked together. They cleared the blackened timbers. They raised new beams. The sound of hammers on wood, of men laughing as they worked, was a new kind of prayer in the valley. They rebuilt the barn, but they built it different. The stalls were on one side. The other side, the one with the good morning light, was walled off. It was a single, large room with a real plank floor. Evelyn found a large piece of slate from the riverbed and mounted it on the wall. Tahan sanded a plank of pine until it was as smooth as silk, and they set it up on log legs, a desk. The first class was held on a Monday. Jonah sat on the floor. With him were Kutsu's 2 daughters, shy and silent in their beaded dresses. Tobin's son, a gap-toothed boy with a thatch of red hair, sat next to them. Evelyn, her hands stained with chalk, drew an A, she said, for apple, for Arturo. Next to her, Tahan stood. He held up a hawk's feather. "And for Atsa," he said, his voice soft. He then drew a simple, beautiful, curling line in the dust. "This is the sign for water, for the spring." The children watched, their eyes wide. A new language was being born, a language of chalk and dust, of letters and signs. The pace of life slowed. It found a new, quieter rhythm, the rhythm of rebuilding. The sharp, high shriek of the barbed wire was replaced by the low thud of a post-hole digger. They were building a fence, a simple, 2-rail fence around the new garden Evelyn had planted. It was late afternoon, the air warm and smelling of pine and fresh-cut earth. Tahan would set a post, his muscles moving with an easy, powerful grace, his shirt soaked in sweat. Evelyn would follow, digging the trench for the new chutes, her own face smudged with dirt. Jonah was running between them, a small, happy whirlwind in a world that was, for the first time in his life, safe. He was chasing a butterfly. He tripped on a tree root and went sprawling, his laugh turning into a small, startled cry. He sat up, his lower lip trembling, looking at his scraped knee. He held out his arms. "Ma," he wailed, his voice full of the absolute tragedy of a 4-year-old's pain. "Ma pa Tahan, I fell down." Tahan stopped, the heavy wooden maul resting on his shoulder. Evelyn froze, her hand in the dirt. They looked at each other over the half-built fence. Tahan's face was unreadable for a moment, and then a slow, deep, and utterly beautiful smile spread across his features. It was a smile that lit him from the inside, chasing away the last of the shadows. Evelyn's own laugh came out as a sound that was half sob, half joy. She scrambled over, kneeling, pulling Jonah into her arms. "Oh, my goodness," she said, kissing his dirty knee, kissing his dusty head. "That was a big fall. You are so brave." She held him close, her eyes finding Tahan's. "It is all right, baby. Ma is here." Tahan walked over, kneeling beside them, his big, rough hand coming to rest on Jonah's head. The boy immediately leaned into his touch. "Pa Tahan," Tahan said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "That is a good name, a very strong name, but Tahan is also good." Jonah, his tears already forgotten, looked from one to the other. He beamed. "Ma," he said, pointing to Evelyn. "Pa Tahan," he said, pointing to Tahan. Evelyn met Tahan's gaze over the top of the boy's head. There, in the dirt, with the sweat of honest labor on their skin, they were a family. The romance was not in the moonlight and roses of stories. It was in this, in the shared work, in the shared glances, in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that they were building this new, open, honest life together, one post at a time. A year had passed, the seasons had turned, and the land, scarred by fire and drought, had begun to heal. The spring that had been the source of so much blood and fear was now a place of peace. The new, shared water troughs, one built high for the cattle and one low for the wild, were always full. Tahan's simple, fair agreement had held. The ranchers, led by Jed and Tobin, found their herds healthier. They lost fewer cattle to thirst, and the wooden rail fences, the ones a horse could see, kept them safe without needless injury. Sometimes, in the quiet of the early morning, a small band of bison would appear. Ghosts of the plains returned, drinking from the low trough. The sight of them, a miracle of resurgence, brought both Comanche and white settlers to a shared, respectful silence. The cavalry patrols from Lieutenant Webb's old post were rare. His reports and the arrests of Dugan and Pike had changed the Army's view of the territory. The blue uniforms were no longer an occupying force, but simply travelers. Dusty Crossroads was no longer a point of friction. It was just a town, finding its way. They made their union official in the heart of that healing summer. It was a wedding of two worlds, a quiet acknowledgement that their life was built on both. They stood first in the small church, the sunlight streaming through the clean windows. Father Holt, his voice steady and his eyes clear, read the simple service. His hands, which had once trembled with fear, were now steady with conviction. This, for him, was the final act of his atonement, a joy he had not believed he would feel again. He pronounced them man and wife under the eyes of God. But the town did not disperse for a celebration. Instead, the congregation, a mix of ranchers, shopkeepers, and Comanche families, walked together. They walked from the church, through the town, and up the low rise to the place where Atsa's memorial pole stood, its cedar surface weathered to a beautiful silver gray. Here, in the open air, Tahan and Evelyn stood before Kutsu. Tahan wore clean, serviceable buckskins, his black hair braided with a strip of blue cloth. Evelyn wore a simple cotton dress, the color of the summer sky. Jonah stood between them, holding both their hands. Tahan took Evelyn's right hand in his left. Kutsu stepped forward, a solemn look on his face. He held not a leather thong, but a small, carefully folded piece of linen. It was the handkerchief with the tiny blue embroidered flowers, the one she had given Tahan in the barn, the one he had kept through fever, imprisonment, and battle. He gently, skillfully, wrapped the cloth, binding her wrist to his. "You were two people," Kutsu said, his voice clear and strong on the wind. "Now, you are one family, one life, one water." Tahan looked at Evelyn, his eyes saying everything his words did not need to. She looked back, her heart so full she thought it might break. This was the vow that had been sealed in fire and grief, now spoken in peace and sunlight. Their life was in the rebuilt barn. One side was for the horses, but the other, the side with the good morning light, was the heart of the valley. On one wall, Evelyn had hung the large slate, and beside it, a painted plank with the alphabet, A to Z. On the wall opposite, Tahan had hung his restored shield. Kutsu had helped him, stretching new hide over the frame and repainting the red-tailed hawk, its wings spread, as if to protect the children. In the back of the room, by the door, hung a third object. It was a small, simple square of dark wood, framing a piece of white linen. Mounted in the center was a single 6-inch piece of rusted barbed wire. It was the piece Tahan had pulled from his mother's dress. It was there as a reminder, a sharp-edged promise to never forget the cost of laws made without humanity. Evelyn was the town's teacher. Her class had grown to 9 children, 3 Comanche, 5 from the ranches, and Jonah, who darted between the groups, a happy, bilingual bridge. He spoke English to his mother and a quick, laughing Comanche to Kutsu's daughters, translating the rules of their games for the Tobin boy. The sound of the schoolyard, a mix of 2 languages, was the new sound of dusty crossroads. Tahan had become a guide, a bridge of a different sort. He worked with the railroad, taking wealthy men from the east on hunting expeditions. But his hunts were not the slaughters of old. He taught them to respect the land, to track one animal, to take it cleanly, and to waste nothing. He was teaching the white man's world the old laws of the Numunu. On the days he was not guiding, he taught the children. He took Jonah and the Tobin boy and Kutsu's daughters and taught them how to read the clouds, which plants held water, and how to walk so silently that the deer did not lift their heads. He was passing his mother's wisdom on. The past had finally been laid to rest. Word had come from the territorial capital. Silas Pike, his leg lost below the knee, had been released from the military prison after a year. His empire was gone, his lands auctioned off by the federal marshals to pay his debts. The parcel of land with the spring had been jointly purchased by Jed, Tobin, and with money from his guiding. Tahan, Silas Pike, a broken, one-legged man, had been seen on a train heading east. Months later, a rumor drifted back that a man matching his description was running a faro game in a Nevada mining camp. His eyes as cold and empty as a snake's. He was a ghost, a story to frighten children, but his power over them was gone. Lieutenant Webb was Captain Webb now, promoted and transferred to a desk in Washington. But the man was not built for desks. Every summer, he took his leave, and he rode. He always stopped in dusty crossroads. He would sit on a small stool at the back of the schoolroom, his blue uniform seeming out of place, and he would watch Evelyn teach. He would watch the children, red and white, write their names on the slate. He was, he said, checking on the Army's investment, but as he watched Jonah read a line from a book, his face would soften. He was checking on his own. It was a warm evening in late August. The fire in the central pit burned low, the smell of wood smoke sweet in the air. The children, all 9 of them, were gathered around Kutsu, who was teaching them a song, a quiet, rhythmic chant of the stars. Their voices, high and clear, were the only sound, a counterpoint to the crickets. Evelyn sat on the porch, a mending basket forgotten in her lap. She was just watching, her heart full. Tahan came and sat beside her, leaning his back against the porch post. He smelled of horse and the clean, dry grass of the plains. He put his arm around her, his hand resting on her shoulder. She leaned her head back, resting against his solid chest. They sat in that deep, comfortable silence for a long time, a silence that only people who truly know each other can share. They watched the stars emerge. They listened to the children sing. "He is happy," Evelyn whispered, her eyes on Jonah, who was singing with all his heart. "We are all happy," Tahan said, his voice a low rumble. He held her, his arms circling her waist. He looked at the land, his home. He looked at the memorial pole on the hill, a dark line against the purple sky. He looked at the schoolhouse, dark and quiet, holding the future. He looked at the woman in his arms. "We kept the water," he whispered, his lips against her hair, "and we kept each other." Evelyn closed her eyes, a single, happy tear tracing a line through the dust on her cheek. She was home. Out on the plains, the land was quiet. Justice, Tahan had learned, was not a loud, complicated thing argued by men in suits. It was not a judgment, or a fire, or a rope. It was simple. It was the sound of children singing by a fire. It was the sound of a man and a woman breathing in the dusk. It was the quiet, decent, human agreement to stop and to share the water. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to connect with you. So please comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from, and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like and support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.